Hi, I'm Val from Quilty Pleasures, and today we're going to start sewing the blocks for my favorite color is Moda sew along quilt. This is block number 1. It's 36 inches square, so we're starting big, easy sewing, easy assembly, and it'll get you off to a good start. So we're only going to do the one block this time because it is quite large and there are a number of pieces in it. But all of the pieces are identical. So they are all half square triangles. If you look at all of these individual pieces, they are all half square triangles except for the corner squares. So it's just going to be doing the same piecing over and over again. You'll get lots of practice, you'll get really good at it, and I'm going to show you some tips to make it even easier than they tell you in the book. So we'll get started. I've used up my fabric because I've been making the quilt, so I'm going to use black and teal for my sample to show you how to do this. I'm going to do my marking on my black fabric. On the colors I used in my quilt, I did use a friction pen, but I'm going to use a white Marvy marker on this one. I'm going to use my quilter's magic wand, and I'm putting the laser line on each corner. Get in there nice and close. So that laser line is hitting that corner. This corner is on the same line. I'm using my Marvy marker, and I like to hold the magic wand as close to the corners as I can get. It kind of depends on the size of your hands. And then I'm just going to draw along one side of the marker, and then I'm going to do it on the other side. Whoa, I moved, but that's okay. Along the other side as well. Okay, so here we are at the machine. I've got my black piece of fabric with the white lines on it, my teal fabric, and I'm just going to place the black on top of the teal. Now, we're working with solids, and it's very difficult to tell the right side of the fabric from the wrong side. Fortunately, the Bella solids are so saturated with dye, there really is no difference, so you don't really have to pay attention to right sides, wrong sides. If you were doing this with prints, of course, it would be right sides together, always. So I've lined everything up, and now, over here at the machine, I've chosen my 1/4 inch foot, the clear foot, which is my favorite. It is plastic, so it's not quite as durable as the metal one, but I love the visibility of it, and the markings are nice and clear, and I can see my fabric underneath it. So this is my favorite 1/4 inch foot. And I don't like to have a right guide, especially when I'm doing this technique, because I'm going to be sewing over the top of the fabric, and I don't want the guide to be dragging on the fabric and moving it as I'm sewing. So I'm putting my foot on. And I always start and stop with a buddy, which is just a scrap of fabric that helps me control my threads when I'm starting to sew, keeps the fabric from ever getting shoved down into the needle plate. I'm sure you've had that happen on occasion. It's most annoying. And I'm going to engage my needle down. If your machine has that feature, this is a good time to use it, because you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to start sewing on the line, and actually I tend to sew just inside the line, if I can do, because that just gives me a little skidge more of insurance. So I'm sewing. It's not a race. Stay on the line as close as possible and right off the edge of the fabric. Now my needle is down. My presser foot raises itself automatically. If yours doesn't, just lift it up and then scoot your next piece underneath and continue sewing. I've left about 1/2 inch of thread stitching in between pieces. That just gives me something to trim later. And I continue this one. And sew again along my line. And it's not a race. Just, you know, take your time, get into the zen of it. All you're doing is stitching along a line, no biggie. And then I'll stitch a little bit and then back onto my buddy. And then I can trim this. Okay, so now we have our stitching along the lines that we drew. We're going to cut these in half, and then we'll have our 2 half square triangles as a result. I'm going to use my regular ruler to do this cutting. I want to impress on you, the magic wand is not for cutting, ever. It's too tiny and you'll cut yourself rather than your fabric, and we don't want that. So take your regular ruler and you're going to cut from corner to corner in between the 2 stitched lines that you just made. So I'm just putting my ruler there, cut, and now I have my 2 untrimmed units, and they are miraculously, if I can open them, half square triangles. But we're going to trim them to make them perfect. So what I'm doing now, taking my triangle square up ruler from Eleanor Burns. It's brilliant. It lets you trim your 4 sides of your block in only 2 cuts, so it saves you time and it makes it extremely accurate. We're trimming this to be 6.5 inches, so I'm finding my 6.5 inch line on the ruler, and I'm just going to place that exactly on the sewn seam line that I did here, and I'm sticking. There we are.
That's what the true grips are for.
That's what the true grips are for, exactly. So things don't scoot. So I want to make sure that my 6.5 inch line is on my seam line. But if I happen to wobble a little bit in the middle, I want to really pay attention to the corners here. They have to be exactly on the line. So even if things went slightly awry here in the middle somewhere, this is where I really want to pay attention. I did okay here, so I'm not worried. So I'm going to hold my ruler. Nice sharp blade. I don't have a whole lot extra here to trim off, but it's enough to make this accurate. And then I'm going to trim off these dog ears too. One here, one here, and then you'll see it's taken away all the little raggy edges. Everything's perfect. I'm putting my darker fabric on top, giving it a light press, flipping this over, and then I'm just pressing it. I'm not pushing. I don't want to distort my seam. I want it to stay nice and straight, but I do want it to be flat. So I'm pressing it, making sure there are no creases or pleats or anything weird going on in the seam line. And there's my finished block. And if we look closely, Amy, the corners are perfect. Each half of the triangle is exactly half, and they're going right into the corners. So when these are added to the next piece and that 1/4 inch comes off each edge, the corners will still be in the corners where we want them to be. Now it's time to put the blocks together. And earlier I said when we press, you know, we generally press over to one side, which gives us a bit of a ridge along the seam line. And one of the advantages of doing it this way is that your seams can nest together really tightly when you're putting your blocks together. So I'm just going to show you really quickly here. If I were putting these two blocks together, I can just nest those seam allowances nice and tight. There's a ridge here where the seam allowance is underneath the black, corresponding ridge here underneath this black, and those will just press in there nice and tight. I can align my raw edges and I could sew, and then when I open this up, if it were really sewn, I will still get a perfect point here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance left over. Now when we were making these blocks, I said to press under the dark side of the fabric, and that generally works. It's kind of a convention which we usually follow, but we weren't really paying attention to how these blocks are going to go together in your final pattern. You've got a map in your pattern. It tells you how to lay them out. It's all color-coded. It's easy to follow. But you may find when you're putting your rows together that your seams won't butt like this, but they may sit on top of each other and kind of give you a really flat side and a really lumpy side at your intersection. And that's difficult to deal with. So what I suggest doing at this point when you're putting your rows together, you can change the orientation of your seam allowance. So all you do is close up your block again, press the seam to relax the fibers the same way we did before, and now put the lighter fabric on top, fold it over, and press. Now your seam is under the lighter fabric, and when you put them together, they will nest up the way you want them to. I found when I made this block that if I pressed the flying geese in always to one direction, it fit better with the next row. Sometimes that can't be done, and once you've sewn your rows together, you might find that you have that lump and you can't repress at that point because it's already been sewn down. So I'm going to show you a way of dealing with that. I'll just show you what I did here. If you find, there's two ways of dealing with it. If you find that you want to change your orientation so that you can get your seams going in the opposite direction, you can just twist the seam allowance. I don't really like to do that because it does leave a lump. This is a bad pressing, yeah. It leaves a bit of a lump, so I don't like that. An alternative way to deal with that is to take some really sharp scissors, and for a fabric store, do we have any really sharp scissors? I don't know.
Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah. Just clip. No, we don't. Clip into that seam allowance, close to your stitching but not into it. And then you can press half of the seam one direction, half of the seam the other direction, and it lies much flatter. So that's a way of dealing with opposing seams that don't oppose and you want to change the orientation after you've sewn them down. So I think if you follow the pattern, follow the map, we have the written instructions too where I explain some of this stuff in a little bit more detail, I guess, and it's written down. That will get you going on this block. It's nice and big, it goes together quickly, and good results, nice showy results. Get you off to a good start, and then we'll be ready to start with blocks 2 and 3, which we can do together because they're identical, next time. Okay, so happy sewing and good luck. If you need any help, give me a shout, drop me an email, and we'll be happy to help. Thanks.